When I was a child, I was taught to read the Bible and study the Bible purely from the perspective of who God is and what God does, which meant that we studied books like Exodus from the vantage point of God delivering the people of Israel, Pharaoh being a mean government official, and that was it. When I got older, what I discovered was that black people generally had been reading the Bible with much more sensitivity to how the story related to us. And so whether you call it liberation theology or whether you call it a creative hermeneutic, the civil rights movement, the protest movement, the slave rebellions were in large measure inspired by the idea that Pharaoh was not just an historical figure in northern Africa who was ruling and reigning over the descendants of Jacob and Joseph, but Pharaoh represented a corrupt, oppressive, abusive system and therefore became a metaphor for barriers, obstacles, and enemies for black people who were enslaved, or black people who were denied, or black people who were the victims of discrimination. And so as I grew into my adulthood and looked at the broader perspective on the biblical story, I understood now how white people would read the Bible and understand God one way, and black people would read that same Bible and because of our circumstances would interpret the Exodus story as God not only delivering the Israelites back then, but God being a God who was on the side of the oppressed. And so at the beginning of Exodus, we see that the harsher the people were treated, the stronger they got. And the parallel became so vivid for me because black men, black women, black children were abused in unspeakable ways. I mean, can you imagine a woman watching her son lynched and people celebrating while he hung from a tree? Can you imagine a man having to listen to his wife's being abused and raped and then impregnated by their master? Can you imagine families being sold and sent to different plantations? That was pain. Yet in the midst of that pain, we did what we had to do, but yet we stuck together, we kept our faith, we started churches, we developed skills and businesses. The similarity between what the Bible describes those people going through and what life was exposing us to what we were going through are so striking that they became both descriptive and prescriptive, and that's the difference. It's one thing to read the Bible and it's just a description of what happened then, but it's something else to read the Bible, especially in the story of Pharaoh, and it becomes prescriptive. In other words, the Bible begins to be a prescription for the people who are experiencing now what they were experiencing then. And so our people became determined to never let the oppression of today stop us from hope for tomorrow. So we sang songs like, "Before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave." Now, we could not end slavery as an institution, but what that did was it invoked a spirit of freedom in our bosom even before we were free politically. Then it says that God called on Moses to speak truth to Pharaoh. And from the time of our beginnings in 1619 up to and including today, black culture, black religion, black politics, black life has assumed that there will arise these Moses. We called Harriet Tubman Moses. We called Martin Luther King Moses. The Moses image came straight from Exodus, and we have depended upon and expected and cheered for our Moses to speak to our pharaohs. And so Pharaoh in the Bible was restrictive and abusive. He summoned the people and required that they would make brick without straw. And this nation summoned us to build without pay. We built the White House. We built this country without being paid. We were enslaved. And our Moses, in every season, spoke to our pharaohs, and we appreciated the value of having a Moses because of the book of Exodus. And then in the end, after Pharaoh couldn't take anymore, let the people go, the Bible says, and Pharaoh changed his mind. And so the people had left Egypt. Moses and his crew were facing the Red Sea, only to discover that the Pharaoh had said, let them go. The same Pharaoh that said, let them vote. The same Pharaoh that said, give them affordable housing. The same similarity in this country, where our Pharaoh seemed to have a season of enlightenment. Our pharaohs in this country signed bills to make life easier for black people. We've had affirmative action. We've had DEI. We've had all kinds of things that made us feel that we were past the enslavement of yesterday and into the promised land. And now, as the Bible said, Pharaoh changed his mind and came after the very people that had been enslaved. So when we look at the Bible from our perspective, from the perspective of our history, we see the Bible quite differently than those people who have been in power, who have had privileges, who have had resources, and who were never enslaved. And so slavery forces people to read the same story as people who have never been enslaved, but read the story differently. And that's why black religion will always have a unique role in Christianity, because black religion in America comes from an experience that's unique to our community.